Hello, and how are you, my friends? I'm Peter, and here I'm telling you stories about the most interesting European cars of the 80s and 90s. Today we are talking about a car with a beautiful sound, many unusual features, and a wild temper, the TVR Chimaera. But before we start, don't forget to subscribe to my channel to never miss a new video. And if you already subscribed, thank you so much. Now, let's get back to the car. The TVR Chimaera was produced from 1992 to 2003, with a total production run of 5,256 cars. Most of them were made in Blackpool, UK, but TVR also assembled them in Malaysia, in Port Klang, selling those cars to Asia and Australia. TVR was a small manufacturer, so even with that relatively small number of cars produced, the Chimaera became the best-selling TVR car not only in the 90s, but in all the history of TVR. The next popular TVR model, the TVR Griffith, was sold in twice the lower number of 2,600 cars. It is estimated that from 85 to 90% of the Chimaeras were made with a right-hand steering wheel. But TVR did produce a limited number of left-hand steering cars and sold them in continental Europe. The name Chimaera is a slightly changed Greek name for a mythological monster created of parts of different animals. I believe that Peter Wheeler, the owner of TVR, chose this name as a self-irony, considering that the car was made using parts from Rovers, Fords, Vauxhalls, some other cars, and TVR's own made parts. In the 80s, TVR produced a line of sharp-edged, wedged-looking cars with different engines and exterior design variations, collectively known by TVR enthusiasts as the wedges. They were really good and interesting cars, and I already have a video about one of them, the TVR Tasman. But by the end of the decade, their design, conceived by Oliver Winterbottom at the end of the 70s, was already outdated. So TVR started developing a new platform, a new look. After several concept cars, in 1990 they launched sales of the TVR Griffith, designed by TVR's in-house designer John Ravenscroft. And in 1992 TVR presented an improved and more luxurious version of the TVR Griffith, designed by the same John Ravenscroft, under the name TVR Chimaera. At first the idea was that the Chimaera should replace the Griffith in the production, but those two cars were different in character. The Griffith was closer to sports cars, and the Chimaera was more like a Grand Tourer. So different customers with different approaches still placed orders for both cars, and TVR decided to keep the Griffith in production, and both cars were produced in parallel until 2002. The Chimaera in large part shared the chassis with the Griffith, and the engines to some extent, but it had a different body, different interior, and slightly different suspension, which resulted in very different feelings from driving those two cars. Like other TVR cars, the Chimaera had a fiberglass body mounted on a steel tubular backbone chassis, and all cars were handmade. That had its pros and cons. All cars were produced only as two-seater, two-door convertibles, and there were no other body options. The Chimaera had two facelifts in 1996 and 2001, with small updates in bumpers, front grille, lights and interior trims. But being a handmade low-production car, some particular cars of the same year could have small differences in the interior, like placing some buttons or indicator lights. The Chimaera was a small and tiny car, practically like the Mazda MX-5 Miata in length, about 4 meters or 158 inches. But it was slightly wider than the Miata, with 187 cm or 73 inches versus 176 cm or 66 inches of Miata. And the Chimaera was a very light car, with a carb weight of 1060 kilos or 2300 pounds, which made it a very interesting and dynamic car considering its powerful engines. The exterior was nice and cute, and in general resembled classic British roadsters of the past, and had the same general approach as, say, the MG RV8, sold at the same time. I have another video about it. But the TVR had its own design features, giving it a little weird, but a very distinctive look. It could be used in 3 versions of the body. With the roof fully closed, it was like a coupe. With the roof fully open, a convertible, no surprises. But the convertible top consisted of 2 parts, a fixed foldable rear part and a removable carbon fiber panel in the middle, which you should remove before opening the roof and reinstall when you close the convertible top. At the same time, you could just remove the middle part and leave the rear part of the top up. In this case, the car became a Targa. The Chimaera, like the Griffith, had a strange form of the front edges of the doors, curved and not aligned with the door opening. The legend says that TVR couldn't install the fiberglass doors with even gaps, despite all efforts. So they just embraced this fact and made specifically disproportional doors as a self-irony. In reality, this was a result of TVR's experiments with additional strength of the body structure. The curved door edge allowed for better accommodation of the A-pillar and scuttle structure, maintaining strength and rigidity without additional reinforcements that would add weight. In addition, those doors were intended to help with aerodynamics and better fit of door seals. There is no data on whether it really worked or not, but the fact that those doors gave the car a distinctive and unusual look is inarguable. Another door fact: the doors went all the way down to the bottom of the car, covering the door seals, like in the Saab 900, which I have another video about. So, the strip that looks like a door seal at the bottom of the door is actually a part of the door and opens together with it. And we still haven't finished with the doors. You can't see any door handles on them. Well, because there are none. If you wanted to enter the car, you pressed the button and the door just popped up, so you used its edge as a handle to open it. At first, those buttons were combined with the door lock on the side of the car behind the doors, but later the buttons were moved to the bottom of the side mirrors. Opening the doors from inside wasn't an ordinary task as well. The doors didn't have any latches. To open them, you should turn the silver spherical knob in the center console between the seats. Legend has it that this strange arrangement was used to help prevent thefts of cars. The idea was that if thieves couldn't find how to open the car, they would move to other targets. And if they get inside somehow, they would be trapped and couldn't open the door and escape without special knowledge of TVR. Probably the same idea was behind the designing of the locking system for the trunk. The only way to open the trunk is to turn on the ignition and press a button hidden far below the steering column. A good way to prevent thefts, I agree. But imagine yourself coming out of the grocery store with your hands full of purchases and trying to load them in the trunk. You should first open the door, turn the car on with the key, bend down low and reach the trunk opening button, turn the car off again, take the key off the ignition, go around the car, and finally, put your things in the trunk. The same procedure you had to do every time at the gas station, because the fuel filling cap was under the trunk lid too, and the only way to get to it was to open the trunk. The trunk itself, by the way, was really large and spacious for a car of this size and type. Another interesting design feature was the holes in the hood of the car. You cannot see them from some angles, but the Chimaera has large openings along the whole hood on both sides of the car. These openings were designed to help with cooling down the large engines of the Chimaera in its tight engine compartment. One more legend related to the design of the car says that Peter Wheeler's dog once bit a clay model of the car during its design process. The marks left by the dog's teeth became the openings in the front bumper, where the turn lights are located. Before 2001, the Chimaera had its own round headlights. After the last facelift, the headlights from the Griffith were accommodated in the front fenders. The taillights were also replaced in 1997. The first cars had integrated blocked taillights, but the later cars received taillights with individual round lights covered by a single transparent cover. Many owners installed them on early cars too, so it's rather common to see the later designed taillights throughout the whole range of production years. Another interesting feature, the rear wheels of the Chimaera are larger than the front wheels, 16 inches versus 15. This was done to use wider tires for better control of the powerful acceleration of the cars. And last but not least, the Chimaeras are known for many colors, some of them unusual, and countless combinations of the exterior and the interior colors. The cars were produced to order and painted manually. The interiors also were made by hand. So it was easy for TVR to offer deep customization of colors and their combinations, according to the wildest dreams of its customers. The classic combination is considered to be the exterior in British racing green color with a tan interior. It looks really nice, but I personally prefer Chimaeras in brighter and more aggressive colors. Inside, the Chimaera offered a bespoke handcrafted interior with leather seats and dashboard and wooden or aluminum trims. The dashboard was very nice, with a modern classic look, with 6 separate round gauges all around it. The positioning of the dashboard elements and the design of some buttons and switches could change from car to car, but the whole idea was unified. Some buttons were positioned unusually. The power window switches were on the front side of the central console trim, surrounding the gear lever, and you couldn't see them anyhow. So if you took your friend's Chimaera for a ride, you could find yourself trapped inside the car, not knowing how to open either doors or windows. The control of the air vents and heating was also unusual, with 2 sandwich-like horizontal dials on the front console. The air conditioning was an option, but most cars were sold without it, because a large part of them were sold in the UK, and customers there didn't want to pay for this feature, considering the climate specifics. In addition, the AC added weight, and most of TVR customers preferred performance over the comfort of cool air. The car didn't have a glove box. Instead, there was a leather pocket under the dashboard, a rather pathetic one, but you had a lot of space behind the seats for storage. In addition, you could fold the seats down forward and find a hidden covered storage compartment behind them. The overall approach to the interior of the Chimaera looks a little controversial to me. On the one hand, it is nice looking, and its quality was rather good. The seats were comfortable. The driving position was okay for most drivers, and in total it was a good place for a driver and passenger to be. At the same time, it did have some flaws and inconsistencies in ergonomics and practicality, as if the designers and engineers forgot some things and added them randomly at the last moment. Well, maybe this is not a bug but a feature of TVR cars that make them unique and very interesting. As I mentioned, the seats were good and comfortable. With the tall center console, you could feel as if the car hugged you. You could feel like an integral part of the car. The seating position, however, could be a little low for short drivers, limiting the visibility. Even tall drivers said that they saw more of the car's hood than they wanted. But this made the car look larger from the inside than it actually was, and gave the driver the impression of driving a larger car. Some drivers complained about the very stiff and hard to press clutch and accelerator pedals. But that also was an intended feature used to avoid accidental pressing on the gas pedal on road bumps, which could result in unexpected and dangerous acceleration of this lightweight, powerful and very fast car. And speaking of power, let's talk about the engines. All TVR Chimaeras were sold with Rover V8 engines of different displacement and power output. Those engines were based on the 3.5-liter Buick 215 engines, known as the Buick Fireball engines of 1961. Rover purchased the tooling for that engine from GM in 1965, updated it, and used it in various versions in many of their cars until 2006. TVR bought 3.5-liter engines from Rover and reworked them to increase their displacement and power output. In addition to boring the cylinders, TVR used different camshafts and rebuilt engine heads, as well as used different tuning settings to get the optimal performance. From the start, the 4-liter and 4.3-liter versions were available. The 4-liter one claimed to produce 240 horsepower, a top speed of 245 km or 152 miles per hour, and 0 to 60 miles per hour in 5.1 seconds, already very impressive. The 4.3-liter engine produced 280 horsepower and brought the car to a top speed of 254 km or 158 miles per hour with 0 to 60 in 4.6 seconds. In 1994, the 4.3-liter engine was replaced with another 4-liter engine with higher compression. That engine had 275 horses and almost the same dynamics as the 4.3-liter one, a top speed of 254 km or 158 miles per hour and 0 to 60 in 4.7 seconds. The same year, the largest 5-liter engine was introduced. It produced massive 340 horny ponies and gave the car a top speed of 282 km or 175 miles per hour with 0 to 60 in 4.1 seconds. Those were really crazy specs for a small roadster. And in 1997, another engine joined the line with a 4.5-liter displacement. This one had 285 horsepower, a top speed of 257 km or 160 miles per hour, and 0 to 60 miles per hour in 4.7 seconds. All Chimeras were built with 5-speed manual transmissions. There were 2 of them over the course of production, both with arguably similar performance. The first one was the Rover LT77 with the rear gear to the left and forward. And the second one, from 1994, was the Borg-Warner T5 transmission with the rear gear to the right and back. An automatic transmission never was an option. Well, what was the TVR Chimaera in terms of driving experience? We already know that it was fast. 0 to 60 in 4.1 seconds, that was crazy. That was faster than the Ferrari F40, which I have another video about. And that's still very fast even by today's standards for non-electric cars. And it was a very fun to drive and fun to handle car. The Chimaera had a great independent suspension with double wishbones all around. It was soft enough for comfortable driving, softer than the Griffith had. But at the same time, it did its job very well in corners. Despite its heavy engines, the Chimaera had a very good weight distribution, 51% on the front axle and 49% on the rear one. The engine was placed far behind the front axle, so it was closer to the center of the car, and the gasoline tank in the rear balanced the weight of the front part of the car. The brakes also were good with larger ventilated front brake rotors for 5-liter cars. The Chimaera didn't have any driving assists, ABS or stability control systems. Airbags also never were proposed. Power steering was an option, and less than 50% of early cars had it. Later, at the end of the 90s and in 2000s, power steering was installed in about 65% of new cars. But still, many drivers preferred direct, unassisted steering, which shouldn't really be very hard in such a light car. With the absence of any electronic helpers, the TVR could give you a really pure and raw classic driving experience. A fully direct connection between you and the road, multiplied by hundreds of horsepower. Of course, it was a cool to drive and a very fun car, and the awesome sound of its exhaust added a lot to the driving pleasure. It could be a little loud inside, but what would you expect from a roadster? But all this pure experience and power, of course, also meant that the Chimaera had a lot of character. It was a beautiful little toy, but it could kill you without any doubt if you treated it wrong and exceeded its and your own limits. It was a car for experienced, contained, reasonable and cold-minded drivers. And it could be a really deadly dangerous car for inexperienced drivers, which was difficult to control if you drove it recklessly. This cast a little gruesome shadow over the Chimaera in the eyes of the public. But if you really knew what you were doing, this car could give you really fantastic driving feelings, emotions and memories. Particularly because from inside it felt even faster than it actually drove. At the same time, it was surprisingly ready for day-to-day use and for long trips, with its large trunk, enough interior room, comfortable seats and good sitting position. And the suspension was soft enough, so you didn't feel every bump with your back like in many sports cars. The Chimaera provided you with enough nice, comfortable and relaxed luxury cruising experience, but could become a real naughty girl when you wanted it. The TVR cars had a kind of a bad reputation related to their quality in the eyes of those who never had one. But actually the quality of Chimeras was never bad. It could have some inconsistencies due to its hand-built nature, but the Rover engines were reliable, and the body, interior and suspension never had serious issues. The rust although could be an issue. The fiberglass body itself obviously doesn't have any problems, except maybe some small easy-to-repair cracks. But the steel chassis can rust very severely, so if you want to buy one, this is your first place to inspect. At the same time, I heard an opinion that this doesn't really matter now, because all cars that had rust issues were either repaired with the replacement of the frame elements or the whole frame, or already rusted to the ground. I believe that the TVR Chimaera was a very significant car for TVR history and for British automotive history as well. It was the best sold TVR model ever, and it contained and preserved the spirit of great British roadsters of the past, combining it with new engineering and engine building technologies. It was one of the last mass-produced British cars with such a pure and exciting driving experience. It was very popular at its time, and it still has one of the best price-to-fun ratios among British cars. and it may be one of the best cars you can ever drive. The TVR Chimaera was never sold in the United States during its production, but a large part of the cars is older than 25 years now, so you can legally import them to the US if you want. There are not so many cars in good condition to choose from, but they are. The parts are easy to find, and the community of TVR owners is known to be one of the most supportive and friendly. In the UK, the asking price for a Chimaera in good condition is from 10 to 25,000 British pounds. This is very reasonable in my opinion, and maybe you can find even better options if you search deeper. In continental Europe, the number of listings is very limited, and the cars offered are claimed to have near to collectible quality, so the prices are from 20 to 45,000 euros. This probably is a little too expensive, but those cars have left-hand steering and therefore higher resale value in the United States. Well, thank you very much for watching. If you owned or drove a TVR Chimaera, please tell me about your own experience and your opinion on this car. Thank you so much for your stories. And if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. New interesting stories are coming soon. If you want to support this channel even more and help me make new videos, you can buy me a coffee by the link in the description below, or simply don't skip YouTube commercials on my video. Thank you so much, my friends, and see you next time.